boom years of the 1990s and 2000s, one of the buzzwords in India was India's demographic dividend. Yes, it's true, India will soon have 1/5 of the world's working age population. But the somber reality is that less than 10% of this working age population is covered by retirement benefit schemes. Health insurance coverage in the country is low. Traditional structures like the joint family system is unraveling, leaving very little old age support for people in India. Today we're asking the fundamental question, India at 60, happy or helpless? On our panel today, introductions first, Rajesh Sood, CEO and Managing Director, Max Life Insurance. Kulin Patel, on my right, Director, Client Account Management, Tars Watson and Company. On my left, Yogesh Agarwal, Chairman of the PFRDA, which is the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority. Santosh Desai, who is Managing Director and CEO of Future Brand India. And joining us from Mumbai, Ashwin Parekh, National Leader, Global Financial Services, Ernst & Young. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Let's get down to the facts today as we know them. And Rajesh, this one's coming your way. Max Life Insurance has conducted a study on, well, for lack of a better phrase, the state of retirement planning in our country. So what are the key findings of that study? It's recent.
So we mounted this research across 1,100 respondents across 11 cities with Nielsen as our research partner. And some of the findings, I must say, are surprising and some are actually disturbing, to say the least. The biggest thing that we found, and this study, I must say, was done in the urban centers. 11 urban centers were chosen in middle income categories and above, so it does have that bias by design. But in that segment, which we felt was most tuned in to the retirement issue, we found that only 28% Indians had actually thought or done something about retirement, leaving a vast majority of 72% uncovered. We also found surprisingly again, that inflation, while most people understand it, live with it, very few factor it in their calculations. And even of those 28% who've done something about it, 40% of them are actually living on guesswork as to what will be the corpus they'll need to actually retire on. So there is really an absence of a well-studied response to this issue, which we believe is gaining some enormous proportions for everybody in India to be concerned about.
I'm going to repeat, two statistics. 28% of your sample had any form of retirement plan in place. Of that 28%, 40% hadn't really calculated what they'd need at the time of retirement. That's why I said, the somber reality as far as retirement planning in India is, well, in those statistics. Now, at the PFRDA, do you see a similar lay of the land in India, Mr. Agarwal?
Kind of access to any kind of a retirement product. 87% of them don't have any idea, and if they have an idea, they have no access to any kind of retirement planning, and I think that is what needs to be fixed. Basically by way of offering products which are cost effective, but more importantly by way of introducing this consciousness in the 87% that they need a retirement product and how to go about it. That's some good advice on that.
That's what we're going to focus on today on the panel, but broadly, different statistics, different sample sizes, but the central message is the same. So Santosh, how do you explain this, well, ambivalence towards preparing for retirement?
I think there are, broadly two patterns. One of them is a continuation of a traditional idea of retirement, which is the fact that you have a safety net in your children and you've done your bit, and now it's time for them to do their bit. It also comes from an old view where your provident fund was seen to be enough. And it comes from, therefore, a continuation of a largely traditional mindset. There is the other pattern which understands and has a sense of the fact and an anxiety about the fact that your children may not be there to support you in the way that you imagine. They also sort of tune into the fact that inflation is going to kick in and that your expenses are going to skyrocket, but you've woken up to it late. When you actually even do a basic back of the envelope calculation, you're terrified by the prospect of what it takes and what it will take for you to have a comfortable retirement, and this kind of often has a paralyzing effect, because this late, if you're woken up, you really don't know what to do. So in that sense, then it's about let's live for the day, let's hope for the best. There isn't very much I can do in any case, and we'll take it as it comes. So I think there is this ambivalence very really, I mean, part complacence, part terror.
You sort of hit the nail on the head, because it's tough enough to live here and now, and then the intimidating thought of planning for the future is what perhaps paralyzes. And you know, there's one statistic that, I don't know, did Rajesh mention it, but there's a trend that emerged in the survey as well, which said that over 50% of those surveyed expect to live with their children when they retire. And we're going to talk about whether that expectation is misplaced and in fact could be a tricky expectation. But Cullen, let's look at solutions. So what does it take to really change some of the somber trends that we've just discussed? What will it take to trigger a move towards a consciousness towards retirement?
Just to put some things into context, a rule of thumb that I've always worked on: whatever you want to have your income at the age of about 60 or 65, broadly multiply it by any number of 15 to 20. If you want that per annum income of an X amount, multiply it by 15 to 20, and you've got a back of the envelope rule of thumb. And that sort of simple way of trying to put complex issues to people to educate them is a start.
How often do you say that, Mr. Sood, to your client?
Yes, I would actually broad-base that to go beyond retirement into any form of financial security that we're really trying to serve, and that's really what life insurance does. Whether protection or savings, it's kind of built towards financial security. So yes, we do talk about that thumb rule. It's helpful to kind of get people's attention to the subject. Well, the challenge remains that Indians do kind of struggle to find that money that they have to start saving today, and more importantly, the discipline of remaining with it over a period of time, such that they can actually build that nest and the power of compounding works in their favor, are areas where I think more work needs to be done.
So Mr. Parekh, the tough one's coming your way, because we've got two issues here. One is start early. The second is be disciplined. Start early and be disciplined and consistent all the way through. So if you had to suggest some enabling conditions to get more people on track for retirement planning, what would you say?
Yeah, see, there are three things which I thought were very essential, you know, in any economy to put meaningful pension programs, you know, for the people. The first is the behavior, you know, and particularly the savings behavior. Now, if we look at the savings behavior, and that too I'm referring to long-term savings behavior. Now, when we look at the savings behavior, we find, you know, that Indians by and large are really prone to saving. The larger challenge is to move that savings into long-term savings for retirement. Our problem, therefore, is not just on the savings part of the behavior. Our problem is with two different aspects. One is the interest rate risk, and the market risk is so substantial. The markets are so volatile. If I look at all financial instruments which are available to people today, they're so volatile that people have stopped believing in medium-term and long-term savings. And this is one correction in the behavior which is very essential. I mean, it comes through only some kind of fiscal measures, it comes through some kind of incentives, you know, for pension. But before I go into that, the availability of financial assets on a long-term basis is the second important correction that any economy has to do to make sure that a good pension program works. And the third and the most important part is when you really convert any particular program into an implementable kind of, I mean, this is something where Mr. Agarwal will also agree, that, you know, if you really take a hard look, all aspects of pension, educating people, making them aware, making them start preparing for long-term kind of savings, and then mobilizing that savings for infrastructure and other building on a back-to-back, you know, with adequate incentives from the government, is a very important component of a meaningful pension program.
So we'll pause there, Mr. Parekh, because I think you've opened up a whole bunch of different chapters, all of which we need to explore. We'll take a quick break. Back in a moment, we're going to look at, you know, how much government involvement at the policy level in terms of tax incentives is actually required. Can it work? And evaluate some of the initiatives of the government already in play. For instance, the national pension system. That and much more on retirement planning when we return. back to India at 60. Essentially, Rajesh, if you had to make a wish list of tax breaks and rate their viability, what would make your list?
I would certainly think, following from both what Mr. Agarwal said and what Ashwin said, we need to kind of categorize long-term savings separately. The issue right now in the way the fiscal incentives work at an individual level is that they all club. A short-term deposit, a mutual fund investment, your health premium, insurance premium, it's all into one bucket, and you pretty much exhaust that for a, let's say, middle income plus. You would be able to exhaust that through other means and not really save money for the long term. And that needs to be kind of segregated. There has to be a separate incentivization done for pension, could be NPS, could be life insurance, could be anything else, but maybe take a 10-year view to it, at least 10 years. That's my definition of long term. And therefore separately incentivize that behavior, give the tax breaks required every year to put money aside. And that money, frankly, is what the country also needs. At a macro level, the economy needs that kind of long-term funding. The government needs that for infrastructure. That's where a lot of our insurance monies go, and so on and so forth. So I think it's good for the nation. It's good for the individual. It will build a financially secure India.
Drawn your understanding, Kulin, on what's going on around the world, does this kind of tax incentive, tax break really act as the effective trigger we need?
Definitely. Is one of the key triggers and keys that countries have used as an incentive to kickstart the system. The tax allowances and the way that it's set up right now are used up with a lot of the other investments. Provident fund in a salaried class, it is straight away your own contributions to a provident fund most likely use that up in itself as well. And there is an interesting role, I feel, that from a government policy perspective to kickstart even employers facilitating this. It has started with some of the tax changes that came on board last year for the national pension system, because employees are wanting the employers to try and provide something. They are not wanting the responsibility, yet they are saying, and also at the same time saying, that it is one of the top 3 reasons for me to stay at a company.
It's time the Indian people started thinking in terms of feeling for their own pension themselves. See, you look at the government, you look at the employer, what you were saying, or you look at the children. None of this is going to materialize. Increasingly, I think the realization is there already among the Indian population that neither the government is going to, neither the government may have the desire but not the resources.
Right.
Employer will look after you only to a certain extent. Children will increasingly look after you to a lesser extent. So the central theme which is emerging, and which I said originally, was that we have given a platform in the form of national pension system and a cost-effective platform. But it's time that people started thinking in terms of spending less and saving more, and so that they can build up their own corpus and not be reliant on anybody. That's one.
Okay, and I think Rajesh's point was
it should and broad-base this view that we've talking pensions, we must be talking only salaried India. It's not true. Our survey actually had a 60-40 sample between the salaried and the self-employed. And increasingly, the desire for retirement is as strong in self-employed. There's this notion that a businessman never retires.
People don't retire,
yeah? And they love to kind of just be at it forever, and then it's the next generation that takes on. Not true anymore. The next generation often enough is saying, I'm going to do my own thing, you handle your own stuff. And therefore, even that current generation of entrepreneurs is saying that we will have a retirement. And they are equally keen for solutions. So maybe at the salaried sector, the NPS does afford something, but there is an absence still of a broad-based government direction, called, I would almost argue, mandate perhaps, that every individual must save in some form of retirement saving.
So Mr. Parekh, I get to bring you into this conversation once again. When in doubt, look at tax incentives as the answer. But for a cash-strapped government which has got, competing needs and perhaps very immediate needs like food security, education, employment on its plate, is this even a viable course of conversation for us to have? Tax incentives for retirement plans, really a broad and a forceful mandate? How would you rate the viability of such a suggestion?
Yeah, see, basically, when I said fiscal incentives, I didn't mean tax incentives alone. Now, let me articulate my point. You see, I suppose, where does the policy, in some form, the flaw or the fallacy arises? To start with, I think as a nation, we have to make up our minds and say what is the order of savings and what is the way you're going to mobilize savings. The impression you gather from all the fiscal, let's say, measures which are taking place today, that banking system somehow or the other, because Government has a direct control on the banking system. It has a certain amount of capital investment in the banking system. The level of intermediation for the purpose of saving mobilization, has been so high somewhere along. The extent to which capital markets can participate in the intermediation, life companies can participate in the intermediation, and pension companies can participate in the intermediation. And all this is a matter of duration. You know, banking savings is short term, capital markets will be medium term, and life and pension will be long term. And in fact, it is very important for the system to recognize that the fiscal disincentives, to the extent they are required for short tenure savings, is as important as fiscal incentives for long term, particularly for India, where long term infrastructure funds are required. So when I said fiscal discipline and fiscal incentives, I meant the whole package of it.
You quickly like to respond to that before we take a break?
No, I think that's pretty much along the lines that we are suggesting, and I do believe we've done at least some work at the back of our envelopes to say this, even if it looks like a bit of a revenue loss to begin with, if the government has to go that direction in addition to what it already does, will pay back for itself in the form of additional investments into financial security, into financial products, and more importantly, long-term funds, which the economy needs. So if you sum total it over a period of time, I think it's beneficial overall for the nation, and therefore that's maybe a short-term adjustment on the fiscal side the government has to do, but it does pay back. So we're all for it.
Opportune moment for a break. We've gravitated towards the big picture. When we return, it's back to the micro. That's in a moment from now. Welcome back to India at 60, happy or helpless? Well, that is the fundamental question that we are addressing, and I hopefully we've provided some of the answers. But Kulin, like I said, let's get specific, let's get micro here. And it brings me to something like life insurance, for example. How many people, even educated Indians, really understand the role that, say, life insurance plays in that larger retirement plan?
Well, from our experience, as we've seen in the last 10 years, life insurance and the whole concept of that is really just starting to take off, and still the penetration is still a long way to go. So within that, you are trying to say that within that gambit of life insurance, of all the other protection products which are very much needed, you are needing to add retirement to the picture. People will need to do financial planning for what their goals are, and ultimately decide what it is that they want out of life when they are 30, 40, 50, 60 and beyond.
I just want to also get some specific examples of what's been done in other developing countries, because their challenges are very similar to ours here in India. Can you draw upon any specific examples that work here, that are viable here as well?
No, I think the Indian context, it's very different from the developed countries context, largely for one reason, that the developed countries, most of them, have had a very generous pension sector for a very long time. In India, it's a totally reverse situation. Here, if you see, people are struggling after retirement at 60 to somehow get another employment for 2 years, 3 years, because here they realize that the longer they work, the more they'll be able to postpone the date of reckoning for pension.
Mr. Parekh, international best practices that you've encountered that work for India, in India?
Well, yes, see, I mean, I wouldn't look at, let's say, the comparison of developed and developing. My approach to pension will be very different. I have seen that pension is actually a mathematical and an actuarial kind of a product. It's a combination of two. It remains mathematical till a person is completing his working life, and then it becomes actuarial. The actuarial part comes in the probability of how long he is going to live. And in that context, I would say, therefore, that a combination of life and a pension, particularly given to life companies, because if you segregate accumulation from the annuity, from the payout, then once again you're getting into the whole host of market risk issues and the issues associated with mathematical versus actuarial calculations. I have realized that nations which have actually worked out pension more as an actuarial is a much more better approach, a sounder approach than segregating the two. Now in the NPS, without making too much of a detailed discussion about it, It's only one, it's mathematical. It's up to the accumulation stage. Then the life companies provide annuity thereafter. So the answer, that platform that we've created is still an incomplete platform to my mind, basically. So if you move the policy and the platform to an order where you have both, then I suppose you have answered the question.
Any thoughts you want to add? Our time clock is ticking.
Yeah, I'll just say it this way, that I think there are, very rightly as Ashwin has put it, there's the accumulation phase and the pension payout phase. And we believe that before that, as we were discussing, there are also elements of, I think, awareness, education, that this whole process has to kickstart with. Second, it has to be advisory. Somebody has to play that role of an honest advisor and kind of provide you options on how best to plan for these things. And then the third role is one of an enabler and a servicer who will kind of be with you through this journey. I do believe that whether it's insurance companies or other forms of distribution that emerge, that's the role that supply side has to come through with. Because you can create products, but if you can't do these three roles simultaneously, the products don't move, right? So that's perhaps where I see a lot of collaboration possibilities between product designs and access systems like ours. I see the annuity side pretty much intermeshed with whatever accumulation will come this way. It's inseparable. We are joined at the hip. It has to come together. So I think a lot more work has to happen in that direction, and rather than try and cleave these and kind of make it a either or, to me it's clearly an and discussion that we need to have.
Okay. Final thoughts, gentlemen, and I'll start with Mr. Parekh in Mumbai.
The simple message is the family system is breaking up, and the fear of death is not as perhaps large as the death of living longer. I mean the fear of living longer. So please start planning your pension. It's a very serious subject, I would say.
Mr. Agarwal.
Well, I would say that be happy, not helpless, and start saving now.
So start saving now,
and
I think, is the
I would also like to say that some thought was mentioned here that it is too late for people to start saving. I don't think so, because you see, you can't change your age. But whatever your present age is, I think it is still not late. It is still not too late to start saving for a pension plan if you don't have one. So do it now. That's the idea.
Colin.
I say be clear with your goals, whether it's health, financial, or wider social aspects that you want to enjoy in retirement and beyond, and work backwards and plan and be disciplined.
Set your goals and work backwards. Santosh.
No, also remember that eventually all saving is just a form of spending eventually. So you are not saving, you are just spending at a different point in time. So there is no difference between spending and saving. If you enjoy spending, you should enjoy saving as much.
Well, that's a clever way of putting it. And Rajesh, finally.
I'd just say life is a journey, and one of the periods that we all look forward to, what is called the golden period, is post-retirement. And like in any journey, you've got to start packing early, you've got to start planning early. So let's get ready for that.
Okay, so if you value financial independence today and you're still working, imagine how much you're going to miss that financial independence post the age of 60 or 65, whatever the new retirement age is in the future. So start planning now. Thanks very much for watching, and gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us.